What if I tell you that Bard can be manipulated into giving you any unit you want? The Caretaker trait has been bugging me for quite a while, so I finally sat down to crack the case. What I found was a ton of different rules, unbeknown to players, that secretly decide which units are chosen and why. It also quickly became apparent why Riot doesn't want these rules public, because once you know what to look out for, you can manipulate everything in your favor. In case you want to revisit anything shown in this video, you can find a written guide on Tacter in the video description. Speaking of Tacter, they are also the sponsor of today's video. Are you looking to improve your gameplay but you don't know where to start? You should definitely check out the Tacter app, because every user now has access to their new tool to review TFT matches. Here is how it works. After downloading the Tacter app, you can review one of your ranked games for free once a day. If you want, you can sign up for a 3-day trial, or even better, use the code leduck10 to extend your free trial to 10 days. This is 10 days of unlimited testing to help you figure out how to improve your gameplay. Now I'll be honest, if you are a high elo player, you probably won't get that much use out of this tool, because this tool was specifically built for silver to low diamond. It's also not a replacement for coaching. Think of it as a quick way to get feedback instead of doing a lengthy VOD review. To get an idea what this looks like, let's go over one of my games. In this game, I played Shadow Isles with Yorick and Nautilus 3-star and kept out my board with Vanquisher Thresh. I ended up getting second place to a Yunara board, so let's see what the tool has to say about my game plan. It agrees with the Callista Warden setup, but is criticizing the lack of Ornn and Fiddlesticks in the comp and only having Shyvana 1-star. The game plan for Shadow Isles is to build it through Viego early, but the end goal is definitely to have a very legendary heavy board, or you won't be strong enough to win the lobby. For the items, it noticed that I ended up with a Nashor's Tooth instead of the regular Shojin build. It recommended blue buff as a potential alternative for mana generation. Going on the board tab gives me an idea on how to position and which units to look out for as a potential replacement. For example, Shyvana can replace Yorick, and Azir Mel will likely have more impact than the average Gwen. From personal experience, I felt the tool works best if you're looking to improve how to play meta comps. You can encounter questionable advice if you review a game that was very off meta or heavily influenced by encounter or augment choices. At the end of the day, it's still a work in progress, and if you run across any issues, you can use the feedback form to help Tacter improve the review tool and make it even better. If you want to give this a try yourself, use the download link in the description or in the pinned comment, and remember to use the code leduck10 to get unlimited reviews for 10 days. Thanks again to Tacter for sponsoring this video. Now let's take a look at how Bard works in detail. Rule number 1, Bard will prioritize low tier units. This one is pretty simple, but we have to start somewhere. Let's create a scenario where we win every single fight with a mixed bruiser frontline. Here's the result. After 17 rounds, we received 6 Illaoi, 5 Shen, 3 Cyan, and 1 Kog'Maw, Blitzcrank, and Rumble. This small experiment reveals the first rule. Bard will attempt to tailor low tier units on your board. 14 out of 17 units were tailored to the board, and only 3 of them were random outcomes. Also, all of the units were either tier 1 or tier 2, but there's more than one rule to learn from this game. Rule number 2, the 2-round cooldown. This is one of the most important rules to remember. After a unit has been chosen by Bard, 2 different units have to spawn before the initial unit can appear again. If you take a look at this graph, you can see that from start to finish, Illaoi was always chosen with a 2-unit gap. Starting in stage 3-6, you can also see how Illaoi, Shen, and Cyan perfectly cycle each other until the end. In case you're wondering, losing a round does not impact this pattern. You have to spawn 2 different units before a unit on cooldown is available again. Now, you've probably played some Bard Bruiser reroll in the past and found yourself in a spot where you only needed a single copy to complete a 3-star Bruiser on your board. Based on the results of the first experiment, why do the final copies never show up? There is a simple explanation for this. Once you have 7 copies of any unit, Bard cannot spawn this unit anymore. This rule can be easily proven by repeating the first experiment, except this time we start with 6 copies of Illaoi. Initially, everything works as before, but once we own 7 copies, the system breaks. From this point on, Bard will refuse to spawn any more Illaoi. We can also see a large increase in random outcomes compared to the first game. The lesson is, if you ever find yourself in a spot where you have 8 copies of Shen, don't expect Bard to finish the job for you. If you already reached level 8, you might be tempted to give up on Shen 3-star altogether, but for reasons I'll explain later, you might want to hold onto your Shen collection until the very end. Rule number 4, high 3 is max. Going back to the Bruiser example, you've probably seen Bard spawn a Wukong or Volibear, which helped you to get both of them to 2-star and cap out your board in the late game. However, I'm willing to bet that most of you watching this video have never seen Bard give you more than a single copy of Wukong or Volibear. The reason for this can be showcased if you only play Bard 3-star with 2 Wukongs. You should receive the 3rd Wukong fairly quickly, but if you continue the game from this point, Bard will never give you Wukong again. This is because of rule number 4. Once you have 3 copies of any specific tier 4 or tier 5 unit, Bard cannot spawn it anymore. To summarize, the 7 copy limit only applies to tier 1, 2 and 3. The moment a tier 4 or tier 5 unit is upgraded to 2-star, Bard will start ignoring it. If you play a lot of Ishtal Bard, you now understand why Bard loves to give you Skana and Nidalee and help you upgrade them to 2-star but ignores them afterwards. Rule number 5. Units on cooldown create chaos. So far, we've established that units have a 2-round cooldown and they can be tailored as long as they don't exceed a maximum number of copies. But if you played enough Bard, then you likely know that something does make sense here. Let's create a setup with 2 different tier 1 units, Qiyana and Jarvan. In this game, Bard prints Jarvan first, putting him on cooldown. Based on our current understanding, he should print Qiyana next, but he doesn't. Instead, he prints a random tier 1 unit. Why is that? In short, units on cooldown are a problem because they are still viable targets for Bard, but if he chooses them, you end up with a random unit. Let's showcase how to play around this rule when playing Bruisers. We have Sion, Illaoi, Bard and Aphelios on the board. We win the fight and Bard grants us an Illaoi. If we stay on the same setup and win again, Bard will fail to tailor Illaoi and give us a random tier 1 unit. What we can do instead is to swap out Illaoi with Shen, and if we win, we will very likely receive a Shen copy. At this point, Illaoi is not on cooldown anymore. We make sure she's on the board, and as long as we don't have 7 copies, Bard will now tailor her again. If you followed this example, you might ask yourself, why did I say that it's not 100% guaranteed to see Shen? This brings me to the next part. Rule number 6, some things are just random. I would love to be able to say that if you play around every single rule I've mentioned so far, that you can guarantee the Bard tailor. Sadly, this is not possible. The reason is simply that Riot doesn't want players to tailor everything perfectly and therefore included a random outcome. We can prove this in the following example. We only play 1 Bard and 1 tier 1 unit. In the next round, Bard will tailor this unit, but instead of keeping it, we sell both copies and add a new tier 1 unit that is not on cooldown. This works fine for a few rounds, but eventually the system will break and you receive a random tier 1 unit. Here is what you should remember. If you're testing the system and you receive a non-tailored unit from Bard, you can explain it by either having a unit on your board that is on cooldown or that you got unlucky and received the occasional random outcome. Rule number 7. You can tailor the bench. In set 16, you've probably been in a spot where you played Bard, then you've taken a unit from the carousel and this unit was immediately copied on your bench. Can you control this outcome? The answer is yes. You can tailor the bench. In short, bench tailoring can only happen if your board is in a very specific state. None of your units are valid targets. This can only be accomplished if every single copy on your board is either 3-star or triggered the max copy rule. To make an extreme example, here we have 7 bards on the board and nothing else. We buy a legendary unit in the shop during combat and Bard can create a copy of this unit in the next round. There is one unit in particular where this is quite useful. It's not possible to put Galio on the board, so he is stuck on your bench for the entire game. In a normal setup, this implies Bard can never copy Galio. However, if we create a board state with only 3 stars or units that follow the max copy rule, we can force Bard into tailoring for the bench with Galio as the only target. At least in theory, it is possible to end up with a Galio 2-star on level 6 with no help from duplicators or augments, assuming your low level board of 3 stars is strong enough to win your fights. Enough about rules, let's go over an example on how to change your board to manipulate Bard to your advantage. The most common use case will likely be for Ishtal reroll. In this comp, you roll for 3-star Bard, Orianna, Vi and Nico, while also playing Skana, Nidalee and Qiyana for 5 Ishtal. After you unlock Brock, you replace Qiyana. Our goal for this game is ambitious. We want Bard to give us Brock 2-star. We unlock Brock in stage 4-5, so let's take a look how we have to change our board to make this goal happen. Orianna and Vi are 3-star, so we don't have to worry about them. Nico has 7 copies and Nidalee is 2-star, so both of them can be ignored as well. We are left with Bard and Milio that currently can be tailored and therefore decrease our chance to get Brock. In this game, we got the duplicator cash out, so in theory, we could use all of them for Milio and Bard, but let's go with a scenario where Nico 3-star is prioritized. There are 2 ways to play this. We use the duplicators to get both Bard and Milio to 7 copies, or we finish Bard 3-star and replace Milio for someone else. Let's go with the second option, but now we still have to solve the Milio problem. One option would be to sell Milio, but instead I'm gonna use the final duplicator for Orianna and place her on the board. This will remove Invoker at the moment, but if we're confident we can still win with this setup, it heavily increases our chances to get the first Brock. Bard initially gives us a random tier 1 unit, but there is no need to panic. It is very common to get one random roll when forcing for a legendary. I'm not exactly sure what's causing it. It's possible Bard is still considered a valid target and he has to put himself on cooldown first, but quite frankly, this is just pure speculation on my part. The second unit spawn is Brock, meaning we are halfway there. Unfortunately, Brock is now on cooldown for 2 rounds, but this allows us to adjust the board for the next 2 rounds and add some tier 4 units like Skana and Taric as potential targets. After the next 2 spawns, Brock is viable again, but Skana is only 1-star, so we have to remove him for the next fight because we don't want him to get prioritized. In the meantime, we did manage to get a 7th copy for Milio, which is why he's now allowed to stay on the board. Everything works out and we successfully get Brock 2-star with level 7. All in all, I would say the tricky part about manipulating Bard is to figure out a board that is capable of winning without having any units on your board that are either valid targets or on cooldown to maximize your chances. For the final example, I want to showcase that Bard can be manipulated without having to reroll. Here we have 7 copies of Leona, Diana 2-star, 1 Bard and 1 Aurelian Soul on the board. Naturally, Bard will attempt to tailor himself, but what exactly happens while Bard is on cooldown? The answer is that both Bard and Aurelian Soul are viable targets for the next 2 rounds. If Bard on cooldown is chosen, you will end up with a random low tier unit. In this case, it was Qiyana and Rumble. Bard is now a viable target again, so he only prints himself and then goes back on cooldown. In the next fight, we finally get what we want. Aurelian Soul is selected. An even more extreme example can be shown in this setup. In stage 3-3, Bard prints himself and therefore goes on cooldown for the next 2 spawns. However, this time we move him to the bench and keep him in the state. We continue to play the game and unlock Aurelian Soul in stage 3-6. We sell the board to create a state where Bard is on cooldown and Aurelian is the only other unit. Similar to the Brock example, we get a random roll with Kiana. It's quite common for a random outcome to happen first. In stage 4-2, Bard is still on cooldown for one more round and he ends up choosing Aurelian's Soul. Now I understand you can't exactly expect to win a fight with only 2 units, but the point was to highlight what is possible if you create the right circumstances. In the Targon example, a more realistic situation can be created with the augment Double Trouble. Once you have Leona and Zoe 3-star, you want to run the additional copy for the bonus stats, which results in having 4 invalid targets for Bard on your board. If you have enough copies of Taric or Diana and you're in a position to win fights, it's quite likely for Bard to print you either a missing tier 4 unit or Aurelian's Soul while he's on cooldown. For Ishtal and other comms, it's about understanding which units are interfering with a high tier Bard Tailor. If you only have Milio 2-star, he will heavily interfere with good Bard spawns. It might be a good idea to run a 2-star tier 4 unit instead and ignore 5 Ishtal. This also goes back to the Shen example I made earlier. If you have 7 Shen copies, he doesn't interfere with Bard and you can use him to easily get a copy of Wukong and Volibear. Mundo and Koboko, on the other hand, might be the reason why you're not getting a free Volibear. To close out the video, let's briefly cover some edge cases you can run into while trying to manipulate Bard. For example, it's possible for Bard to print himself even though he's not supposed to be a viable target. This usually happens as a failsafe if there's no viable option on your board and bench. A unit that is chosen by a random outcome can appear again as a random outcome, especially if you sell it. I've seen the same unit appear 3 times in a row as a random outcome, but this should be treated separately from the cooldown rule. Stages can make a difference, but there are also exceptions. Normally, Bard only wants to give you tier 1 units in stage 2, but if you only run tier 2 units in stage 2, he can spawn a tier 2 unit after the random outcome was triggered 3 times. I also confirmed that with manipulation, you can get a tier 4 unit in stage 3, but I'm currently not sure if tier 5 units can show up before stage 4. The main problem you will encounter with manipulating for a higher tier unit is that you will often see a random outcome before receiving the desired unit. If we take the Targon example, Bard has to be on cooldown before printing Aurelian's Soul. It might be possible that a similar system is in place even if you have Bard 3-star. I still believe there's a bit more to discover how exactly Bard works, and with the amount of data the community will generate, it should be easier to figure out the rest. As much as I'm confident in the rules that I've showcased in this video, there is a limit to how much I can test these interactions. There might be aspects that I got wrong, especially in regards to the random outcomes. Nevertheless, I do believe that if you follow the findings and manage to tread the line between adjusting your board and still winning your fight, you will get more value out of the Caretaker trait than ever before. I hope you learned something and see you next time.